After I talked Reva down enough to get her to tell me what was going on her end, we agreed to meet at a private medical facility that had a contract with the Hunters Department and didn't ask questions. Then I made a very awkward call through to Gray. "This isn't ideal, mate." That was Gray's way of saying I had fucked up, but he was too nice to actually say it. "Tell me about it. Don't worry, Fia has them tagged. I have their location. You just need to move in with a team and sweep the place clean." There was an awkward pause. "What?" "You are the team." I could feel the tension growing. He wasn't happy about this and he was about to spread it round. "What do you mean?" "You're the only force we have. This whole operation doesn't exist. I can't use anyone else. If the top brass find out that my higher-ups lined up an unapproved sting operation, someone's head is gonna roll. And it won't be theirs, Mr. Subcontractor." I did my best to contain my rising anger. I liked Gray, and he was the one who was set to lose the most here if we fucked up. Still, my neck was potentially on the block too. "What you're telling me is that I'm the only backup you have and failure isn't an option?" He had enough decency to sound chagrined. "I didn't mean for it to go sideways, that's why I called you. I figured if anyone could handle the situation, it would be you." "Sure, try and butter me up," I replied. "You could have told me there was absolutely no contingency plan." "Would it have changed anything?" That was a fair question, and the answer was no. I wasn't actually mad about me being the only operative. I would usually have insisted no one getting in the way, but this once I would have been good to just hand over the problem. And to be fair, if it had gone to plan, we would be clear by now. How were we to know that there would be a secondary buyer and that it would, out of all the possibilities, be Reva's estranged brother? I hadn't actually told Gray that part. No need to make it worse and muddy the waters. "No, it wouldn't have changed anything," I said begrudgingly. "But next time, maybe have a little someone lined up just in case shit goes south." "Deal," he conceded, then sighed. I took in a deep breath and thought for a moment about our options. I was standing on the side of the highway, the cars shooting past at hundreds of k's per hour, and surrounded by trash. I turned and kicked a discarded bottle into the concrete safety barrier. It shattered in a very satisfying spray of glass. "Ah, fuck!" There was silent on the other end of the line for at least a minute. "Feel better?" "Yeah." "Now what? You got any ideas?" I threw my leg back over my ride and booted it to life. "If this is really all behind the curtain, do I have full authorization to get shit done any which way?" I guess." "Good. Leave it with me. I'll call you back when it's done." He groaned, and I could hear a lifetime of memories of dealing with other people's shit filter down through him in that one sound. "I'm gonna regret this, aren't I?" I chuckled and ripped the throttle to get up to speed and merge into traffic. "You mean you aren't already?" So, when I said I had directed River to a private medical facility, I had been rather broad with the interpretation of the meaning of facility. Scattered around the country were off-grid and underground backstreet cutters. Most cities had a few dozen of these wannabe augmentation surgeons. Most were only a shade away from butcher surgeons. Most were only used by the gangs and the desperate. But a few were actually decent, or even high grade. But for one reason or another, they needed to keep a low profile. An even smaller number of these were on the books of the Hunters, kept on a retainer to always have their doors open when we need them and not ask questions. Why? because sometimes you had to have someone to fix shit up in a not so legal manner, and the hospitals were full of people who liked to keep records. Unlike the basement cutters, who only liked one thing: money. When I had told Reva to go to Mossy's bar, she had thought I'd taken a few too many hits to the head. The thing was, Mossy owned the whole building the bar was in, and he rented the basement out to an old friend of his for a little bit of extra scratch. When I pushed open the door to the bar, Mossy looked up from his place behind the polished timber and locked eyes with me. He gave me a small nod, and I pushed my way through the happy hour crowd to an unassuming door by the side of the bar. There was a back entrance too, of course. It was how Reva would have come in. No one wanted to bring a bleeding and dying person through the bar. It would put people off their drinks. I just like to come this way through force of habit. I waved at Mossy, then pointed to the door marked staff only. He gave me a thumbs up and kept pulling beers. Through the door was a hallway to the kitchen and the staff break room. I moved past the break room, empty at this hour, and opened yet another door to a set of stairs that led to the basement. As I descended the steps, I saw a message pop up from Tobias. Apparently, he really wanted to talk to me. That was new. Maybe he'd gotten all the info from my scan sorted out. I glanced at the message. Simply put, it said, "Call." He had something important to tell me. I sent a short reply. On a job, talk soon. Whatever it was, he could wait. I made the bottom of the stairs. It was cleaner down here than you would have expected. It did have a vibe, though. No amount of dusting and polish would shift it. Every underground cutter had that same scummy aura that had nothing to do with cleanliness. It hung in the air. It came in with the regular clientele. This place, however, was the domain of one of the finest cutters in the city. A bit nuts, if I was being honest, but good at his job. Ruckus was about the only person I would trust to get close to me with a knife, outside of legitimate surgeons. Even some of them I would be dubious about without a background check. At the base of the stairs was a short waiting room. A basic office desk was set up and placed against one wall. I even spotted one of those odd Newton's cradle things. Because what's a workstation without a pointless reminder of basic physics? The door to the surgery was ajar. I could hear talking, Reva, then a slightly off-kilter voice. Ruckus. He was an elf, technically, but he was so heavily kitted out with augments, you couldn't tell anymore. It had left him a little cracked around the edges. "Look, lady, I'm not making any promises. Big fella here is perforated in an unhealthy way, unless he's got some Swiss cheese somewhere in his family tree." There was the sound of surgical tools being dropped and picked up from a tray. "Swabs, please, green machine." I walked in on Ruckus in mid-surgery. Rife was on the slab, a mask over his face, no doubt pumping him full of General. Reva stood to one side, looking angry and anxious. Her nerves were palpable. Reva didn't look away from Rife as she spoke. "Why didn't you tell me about this yahoo?" She nodded to Ruckus. "Sure, insult the surgeon. That won't hurt his feelings," Ruckus muttered sarcastically through his surgical mask. I watched as his augmented arms worked their magic, kitted out with all sorts of surgical tools and a micron-accurate sensor array to keep track of vitals. We never needed him until now. Not like we can take your buddy to a normal hospital. This was definitely one of those situations. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say he doesn't have private cover. She shook her head. I wasn't sure if she was confirming my statement or just being somber in the moment. "Those wankers are just after your money anyway," Ruckus interjected. "I'm all about the personal touch." He attached a motorized bone saw to his wrist augment. It whirred to life in a high-pitched whine. "Slice and dice, baby!" "Is that really necessary?" Reva asked as she looked away. He didn't look up from Rife's chest, where he carved a line through the sternum. "Yeah, This boy is built thick. She took a step back. I meant the commentary. Look, lady, you can either have a good surgeon or a sane surgeon, not both. Reva took another step back and flinched as the bone gave way. Yahtzee! I placed a hand on her shoulder, pulling her towards me. He doesn't deserve this shit. He's a father. He's a carpenter, not a gangster. My confusion must have been evident in my expression as she turned to regard me. My family, through all of their faults, aren't... She looked back to Rife. Weren't criminals. What the hell is he doing trying to boost military assets then? Her face turned to stone. I don't know, but I'm sure as shit gonna find out. We moved away from the operating table, crossing to the far side of the room where Ruckus had scattered some furniture for people to rest on. There was even a fridge there that I knew to be full of beer. We dropped down into the ratty old couch that sat against one wall. Reva hung her head in her hands and I gave her a few moments to collect her thoughts. There was some things I needed to get straight before broaching the topic of going after her brother, guns blazing. Like, would I be allowed to blaze the guns back at him? So, I spoke up slowly. I think I need to have some blanks filled in. Reva nodded wearily. She had always kept her past, outside of her mother's death and her involvement in the East State gangs, to herself. I hadn't gone digging. I figured she would tell me when she was ready, if she wanted to. All I knew was she wasn't on good terms with them. She wanted to keep her past distant. Look, I continued, you don't need to tell me everything. The gods knew I had enough skeletons in my past to fill several closets. Just anything that'll help us get back on track with this case, without any more bloodshed. It's okay, she muttered. It was gonna come out eventually. To be honest, it's more embarrassing than anything else. She sounded like she'd just lost a debate, defeated and exhausted. You remember how in orc culture, the head of the family takes on the surname as their title? I nodded, thinking back to the Mason, Hercule's uncle and the head of a very large and influential family. Harlock wasn't my surname originally. It's my mother's maiden name. My family name is Bloodhorn. She let that statement settle, and settle it did as I realized the sudden implication. She had just laid at my feet. Wait, you're the head of your family? You're the matriarch? She nodded slowly. It's not something I'm proud of. I didn't mean to take on the title, it just sort of happened. No, I'm sorry, but how do you accidentally become matriarch of an entire orc tribe? She gave me a look to shut me up, but I could tell there was no real feeling behind it. Back when I was just getting started out in the freelance work, but I was still getting my name out there in the boxing world, my father tracked me down, flew all the way over here from the States to bring me home. I hadn't seen him in years and he was just as arrogant and ignorant as when we had left. I don't know what the fuck my mother ever saw in him. She shook her head, clearing away thoughts of her mother, no doubt. Anyway, he had come all this way to take me home, put me back on the right track, crapping on about my place in the tribe. Load of bullshit, she sneered. He wanted to marry me off for a deal with another family. Holy shit, they still do that? I interrupted, surprised. You bet. Our family was very traditional. We all lived on a few hundred acres of land, farming it, building on it. We had hunting rights to the surrounding area. We did it all the old-fashioned way. She looked like she wanted to spit, but she held it back for the limited hygiene of the room. It wasn't the only thing we did the old-fashioned way. If there was a dispute, you settled it with fists and witnesses. Well, when you're young and dumb, you don't think much about the ramifications of your decisions. I could see where this was going. I let her continue. uninterrupted. He had come with my uncle and a couple of my cousins. She nodded to Rife. He was one of them. That was all the witnesses I needed. I challenged him. I didn't really think too deeply about it. I just wanted them to fuck off, back to the farm, leave me and my mother in peace. I'm going to take a punt and say you won. It wasn't a question. He laughed. He said I was beneath him, so I broke his fucking nose. Reva grinned. That expedited matters. Well, I won't go into the details. Let's just say I didn't realize how bad I'd fucked up until he was choking to death on his own blood. The old bastard just wouldn't give up, wouldn't concede. So I kept going, kept trying to thump some submission into him. She trailed off, staring at her cousin on the slab before us. Of course, I didn't go back, she continued at last. Stayed with Mum. Dug my own personal hole deeper with more fuck-ups. The family kept trying to get me to return. I was the Bloodhorn now. I tried to relinquish the title, but it's only won through victory in combat or death. One of my siblings came knocking once. I wasn't just gonna let him win, have it all his own way. He was young, more stupid than I am. I was still too headstrong and pissed off at all of them anyway. So I sent him home with both arms broken. She looked at me through the corner of her eye, not moving from her hunched position. One guess who that was? Lucas, I confirmed needlessly. She nodded. Cocky little fuck. She flopped back onto the couch cushions. You know, I'm the first female Bloodhorn in 326 years. I thought you said you weren't proud of it. She shrugged. I can't stand the outdated doctrine, the barbaric rituals, the insular community. But most of them aren't bad people. They just don't know any better. You could have gone back and changed that. You think? You think I could sway them? Young, female, foolish? I'd have better luck walking on water. No, they would have tried to manipulate me or worse. So you have no idea how they ended up pulling this shit. I motioned to Rife. She grimaced. Something has gone majorly wrong, and I bet Lucas is at the middle of it. He always had aspirations at how we could become on the same level as the other tribes. How so? The usual, money and influence. He looked up to the other families, but it was all dirty money. None of them got rich through an honest day's work. We sat watching Ruckus at work. He'd extracted all the bullets and was stabilizing the big orc. Now he was beginning to stitch everything closed. Fia has them tracked back to an old apartment block near Joondalup. We still have a job to do. I didn't want to push her, but I needed her for this. Sure, I could probably go in there, shoot and stab my way through most of them, and make it in and out with the case. But I didn't know how many of them were in there, and if they were more like Rife than Lucas. It was a safe bet Reva would want to keep the bloodshed to a minimum. She got to her feet and crossed the room to stand by her cousin, laying a metallic hand on his forehead. What are the chances? She asked Ruckus as he worked. I won't sugarcoat it. He's touch and go. If he dies... Ruckus held up a hand. Lady, I've heard all the threats you can think of and then some. I do my job. If he lives, he lives. Address all complaints to my lawyer. She hung her head. If he dies, it's all on me. Ruckus looked up, eyebrow cocked. Sure, works for me, lady. I know you want to see if he's going to be okay, I said, joining her at the table. But we need to get moving. I don't want to risk losing them. I could feel the change in her demeanor as she mentally shifted gears. The time for feeling sorry was over. Let's go then. I got a lot of questions and someone better have some good fucking answers. We had to go back via the parking structure. Reva had left her bike there, and with Fear's help had boosted Ed's car to get Rife to safety. Taurus's body had already been collected along with the others. Fear had called in a cleanup with Rio. No questions asked. Not yet. It would all be in my report eventually. Rio was gonna love this one. Once we had Reva's wheels back, it didn't take us long to get back on track. We hit the highway heading to the apartment block Fear had pinned on my HUD. It wasn't too far away, but the traffic was still thick despite the time of night. I couldn't help the feeling that we had burned too much precious time back there, that somehow we were heading towards disappointment. But Fear had accurately tracked the car. She had even managed to get a couple of the security cameras in the nearby area to confirm visuals. Unfortunately, there was nothing reliable available inside the building. It was a hive of closed systems. You could bunny hop once inside, but it was very insular. By accident, not design. We didn't know if they were alone in there or if half of Reva's family was going to be hiding inside. For all I knew, there was a small army of pissed off orcs in there loaded with firepower. My one comforting thought was if the majority of the tribe was as loyal to her as Rife and Taurus seemed, we might actually have a chance of getting in and out with some rational discussion. My fear was that whoever was in there was as dumb as Lucas. At long last, we pulled off the highway and shot down a side road, weaving through the ever denser collection of government housing at its finest. Efficient housing solutions, I think, is what the PR specialists called it. A slum would be a more common term. The population of the city had long since stopped being the responsibility of the state and had become a hindrance and an imposition. A problem to be dealt with as cheaply and as quickly as possible. This led to communities, as the newsreels would name them, full of drugs, violence, and forgotten by anyone who was rich enough not to actually have to see them. The sprawling cement and steel structures all looked the same from the road, the distinguishing features being the different graffiti and gang signs scrawled on the street-facing walls. The one we were looking for was conspicuous by the car parked out front on the street, looking expensive for this neighborhood and out of place. I gave it less than an hour before someone boosted it or made off with the wheels. With that thought, I made sure to switch on my anti-theft device. A little something Fear had knocked up that delivered a powerful kick, enough to make a bullock like Jasper recoil. Reva did the same and we left the bikes at the car on the roadside. As we approached the bland grey cube littered with windows, Reva checked her gun, then hid it inside her jacket. We were both still wearing the same clothes from earlier that night. I slid the helmet back on, not necessarily liking the feeling of wearing it, but reconsidering the usefulness of the sensor array. Any idea where they might be inside this behemoth? I asked Reva over our comm. Just listen for the sounds of macho posing, and we'll be sure to find them. If only it was that easy. I'd been inside these places before. The inside of the building was a warren of halls and rooms. Some had been walled up, others knocked through. Even if you had the original blueprints to the place, it would be useless now. As we made our way through the maze, we ran into other residents. Most were poor families and lowlife that had nowhere else to go, so they'd made their homes here, carving out a niche for themselves somewhere that, if not necessarily safe, was at least free. Mostly. To be fair, the slums were communities after a fashion. They were so big they even had their own small businesses inside them. People started up little storefronts to sell food and other necessities. There was specialists who had set up shop here too. Cheap and dodgy medical practitioners, mechanics, electrical engineers, people who had failed their training but knew enough to scrape a living out in these places with people who had no choice but to employ their services. No one bothered us. One partially armoured paramilitary-looking guy and a heavily augmented orc filly with that look in her eye. Most of these people knew not to start trouble. We were trouble. There was only one problem. We were lost. After the first few staircases and going down even more narrow corridors, I gave up on trying to guess my way through the warren. There was a little shop back down that hallway, I said, turning at a dead end. I'm going to go ask if they know where a group of orcs might be holed up. Reva nodded and fell in behind me. The hole-in-the-wall shop front was, by the looks of things, a cellar of luxury food items, coffee, chocolate, spices, and tobacco. Graffiti was scratched around the frame of the counter that poked from the wall next to the door. Some of it I knew. It described that the owner of the shop had paid protection to one of the local gangs. Some of it was gibberish. Some of it was anatomically impossible. A steel mesh covered the hole in the wall, and behind the safety of it, a goblin in an oddly neat pressed blue button-up shirt stood. It had always surprised me how much people like him, who had not much in life, made what they had count. I bent down and tapped 2 fingers on the counter to get his attention. He looked up from a data slate he'd been scrolling. He didn't seem at all surprised by my attire. That made one of us. "Can I help you?" he asked in a soft voice. "I don't do weapons. You want my brother, 2 floors up." "Family chain?" I asked, amused. He smiled, not unkindly. "Something like that." I pulled out some cash from a belt pouch I'd reserved for emergency bribes. You never know when you're gonna need it. Looking for an orc tribe. Could only be a few of them, probably new around here. Drive the shiny box out front. I passed the notes through the grill. He started to nod halfway through my description. 4 floors up, west wing. He counted the notes and popped them in a small cash box, stashing them away. "Might want to move it though. Heard some gunfire up that end about 10 minutes ago." I glanced at Reva. We stood motionless for a full second before running full pelt up the first set of stairs we came across. It took us longer than I would have liked to find our way, but it was still faster than I expected. We knew we were closing in on the right place when I smelt gunpowder in the air. When we came to the first signs of violence, the trails of blood led us to an all-new nightmare. Over half a dozen orcs, male and female, felled before they could even fight back. Guns lay in limp hands unfired. My training took over and I started to look for threats, booby traps, anything dangerous. I scanned the space looking for any hidden assailants with sensors on the helmet. Nothing stood out. The room was poorly furnished, though it looked like someone had tried to make the effort, tried to make it look homely. Either they hadn't been here long enough, or they didn't have the means. In the scene of such carnage, the background of coffee mugs, couches, and a home-cooked meal was jarring. Reva stood, still as stone, her face pale. Tears welled up in her eyes. Her family, estranged as they were, lay slaughtered before her. Her sight lingering on one body in particular, a young male, his face still intact despite the bullet wound through one eye. Lucas. Thank you very much for listening to Cyphers Edge. If you enjoy this podcast, a subscription to the channel will be most appreciated. If you'd like more content from me, you can find me on various social media platforms. I also have a Discord. It's a small community, but we'd love to see you there to talk about the genre and any other topics that relate to the podcast, literature, or sci-fi and cyberpunk. As always, the script and narration were done by JJ Brandis, myself, and the music was done by Kale McLeish. Copyright Cyphers Edge 2026.